Thank you. Ian Heptinstall of PMMS Consulting. With the reductions in public spend, the easy option is to buy less of the stuff that we've bought in the past and or maybe squeeze some supplier margins, but there's little potential in that. Could the panel give us some examples that they see of opportunities for us to get significantly smarter so that we get more bang for the buck in the future, with an estimate of what the size of that potential is, and also what might stand in the way of us just doing it?
Okay, so examples of what we could procure more smartly, how we'd go about doing it. Only a small question. So.
I don't think there's one simple answer, to be honest with you. I think it's a multitude of answers. So it starts off probably with demand management. So this is about making sure that we're getting the right things into the right places. It's about total cost of ownership. So buying the right things that have the right life, and therefore the whole life cost of what you're acquiring is not just simply looking at the acquisitional cost or the revenue cost. I think there's a multitude of different things. So I think it's less simplistic than just simply turning the tap off, because obviously business continues and will continue to be required as a service. So therefore the intelligent thing to do is to look at ways in which you can transform a service, and by that it might lead to a number of different requirements and decisions. As I say, demand management, optimization, total cost of ownership, and just simple examples that we utilised within Westminster in my time there were, again, not how can I put it, earth-shattering or groundbreaking, but literally on a number of line items that we then said, well, actually there are different ways of doing this. Just simple things down from, refreshing laptops and reconfiguring laptops and putting new software onto all laptops, and stopping people from ordering paper diaries because actually you've got Outlook on your desk, so why can't you use that? A whole series of different things, like quite simplistic measures that people understand and start to understand the cultural shift, which is quite important. But even through some of those simple measures, we saved, a six-figure sum. And that's not a small amount of money, but in our terms, because we were able to communicate that back to the business and say, you do realise you've now saved 3 FTE by actually just taking these very simple measures. We took another step in terms of saying, actually, we're going to use multifunction devices across the whole of the organisation. We're not going to allow people to have, even illegal, their own little desktop printers that are whirring away in the corner, kicking out heat, that are costing us a fortune in terms of old-fashioned technology, toner cartridges, maintenance that was going out of control, and all the rest of it. Again, that was another £145,000 that we saved, another 3 FTE. So you start to build up a whole bank of these different things. They're not particularly sexy, they're not particularly sort of groundbreaking in their own right, but actually a collection of those things starts to sort of set the tone and the culture for doing something even bigger, which we did within the transport sector, which was about aggregating transport across adults, children's, community services, etc., etc. And suddenly you're taking £2 million out. Very different ballgame, same principle, but actually by shifting the mindset of people in terms of thinking about things in a different way. That's demand management. That's about altering the schedules by which people went to and from the daycare centre, that went to the sort of the foster centres, to all the different children outlets that the children used to have to go to, and all the rest of it. Just by rescheduling some of that stuff and putting some logistics in place, we saved over £2 million. That didn't hurt anybody. Nobody lost any service, nobody lost any benefits, but we took £2 million out of a £10 million budget. That starts to make some headway, starts to make some impact, but that was about doing something in a very different way. We set the principles at a lower threshold that people could then start to understand and say, this is the principle that you've already adopted and signed up to. There are other things that we can look at without taking your service away. So suddenly, your diminished budget can still deliver the same services, but you had to make some compromises. And that means that, yes, the daycare, OPs need to go home a half an hour later, so they get to go home in the dark in the winter time. Well, that's 3 or 4 months. That's a reasonable compromise, don't you agree? And they're still being dropped off in the same places, so civilian territory, etc., etc. You have to get past, you have to have those difficult discussions, but it does lead to some significant changes in both in terms of behaviour and the cost structure that you have. That's up to the panelists.
I think Kevin's that one there.
The controls and those issues are one of the really attractive ways. The other one I would also recommend is what I call follow the money. We all know that for most of us, certainly in London, 90% of the spend is with about 4% of the suppliers. And everyone, it's all well focusing on demand management for your office supplies, which is about 0.2% of the spend. If you actually go after actually look at those big suppliers, and we did a classic model a few years ago with when we introduced the first ICT auctions, looking at where a number of larger authorities had outsourced IT, and they said, oh no, the private sector deal with all that, they're very, very efficient. Well, as a result of the auctions, what was very, very interesting was that the unit cost savings across all the authorities that took part. Certainly this was even more so in round 2, when we did it again 2 years later, where they'd outsourced, the unit cost reductions were actually greater than where they'd actually be buying things in-house. And there was all of a sudden, it created a number of interesting ripples now, because it's all very well, as we all know, parcelling up stuff and saying, oh, we'll give that to the private sector because they're efficient. Well, you assume a number of things here. One, that they actually have sort of some sort of controlled buying. I know, for example, on a number of the outsourced on transport providers, when they come to do replacement vehicles, they don't buy fleets, they buy one-offs. How can that be efficient? So it's then to start the process of challenging the big contractors and actually saying, well, what have we got in here? What is actually wrapped up in all of this outsourcing thing? And in many respects, again, it's being slightly controversial, I would actually say in some areas, where we should be looking to do in-source or partnership source with a number of things, rather than just throw it all over the fence on an ideological basis and say, that's good, and I'm a fan of outsourcing, but it's got to be outsourcing under the right terms. And again, going to what David's comments are, if you're going to do outsourcing, you need to have the skills and capabilities in-house to actually do that. Otherwise, you're going to get the runaround, which a number of authorities have had over the years.
Following Ken's theme of follow the money, look where your organisation is spending money. It may well be that the professional buyers aren't involved with large areas of spend. On medium-sized organisations, we often find they're not involved in legal spend because, well, we go to lawyers. They're not involved in professional services. Well, we've always used these estate agents. They're not involved in large chunks of money, and that's where the savings to be made, where there hasn't previously been professional procurement involved. Use the central purchasing organisations to do your day-to-day expenditure, where they've got people working on it, and the economies of scale make it worthwhile. But at the same time, look where you've not been involved before, where big money's being spent, marketing, advertising. Very often there's no procurement involvement in those. Oh well, training events, often there isn't procurement involvement. Transport, travel. Look at the areas where you're not involved. That's where there's a savings still to be made, and focus on those.
Nigel.
The question was about kind of smarter procurement and what are some of the obstacles, and I think you said you're from PMMS, and I remember when PMMS taught me about category management, it was very much around the kind of price product process, and you get a few percentage points from price, but you really get your main benefits by doing something around the process and the product. And 2 examples that kind of illustrate what we've achieved and what we're about and we hope we're going to achieve. We rolled out category management over the last 2 or 3 years at Birmingham City Council. And really for the first time, rather staggeringly, we got consistent contracts across the whole organisation for a lot of basic, for example, FM type spend areas. And that brought a lot of people together. It simplified the processes. We're able to redefine the specifications, buy things, reduce the variance that we're buying. It's not especially smart. It's kind of 3 steps up a 10-step ladder, perhaps. But it was really quite radical for the organisation, and the benefits rang out because they were there to be grasped. One of the areas that we are now thinking about, and in fact just yesterday secured one of the directors as a sponsor, is around vehicles and transport, and we've got fleets of transport across each directorate within the council, and each of them work and specify vehicles and journeys quite independently of each other, without any view around the kind of the maintenance costs, the total cost of ownership, the procurement prices, or the vehicle, usages. So the principle that we've had scoped and we've seen the opportunities is that people will buy journeys. They won't buy vehicles, they'll buy journeys. So they need to move, I don't know, 2,000 children twice a day, and maybe kind of 10,000 adults at lunchtime. I give examples, but I don't really have the data to my fingertips. So people will specify what they want, and we'll have a kind of internal brokerage that will identify the vehicles that we need based upon that, and potentially save 30% of a multi-million pound saving. Now, we haven't delivered it yet, but we did get the Director of Fleet and Fleet Waste Management to agree to be sponsor of it before we actually asked him to be sponsor, which was quite a success. So the obstacles really are getting, we've got fleet managers in each of these areas, all of whom have been fleet managers for 20 years and know exactly the best way to run the fleets in their area. So we've still got to overcome those well-intentioned and very capable people and get them to buy in. And then, of course, we've got the political dimension. We've got the cabinet members, their vested interests, or their well-meaning interests, I should say, for the video. We have to make sure that the benefits are there and that benefits are there for the city and the community as well. So, I mean, that, to our mind, is, if you like, a few steps up the smarter procurement ladder, and perhaps something that we're aiming to deliver over the next 18 months, perhaps.
Okay, yeah, please, Tom.
Sorry, just from looking outside in the public sector, I think as you go forward in your procurement exercises, grouping together of the right categories into exercises for frameworks or contract lets is going to be very key. Classic example, I'm probably going to step on some people's toes if there's anybody from the copier industry in the room, so I'm going to smile quickly. Obviously, massive procurement exercises are done on multifunctional fleet devices to remove desktop printers, etc., etc. On the face of it, that looks very good. Okay, you're saving a lot of money by centralising and giving control across the fleet. If that procurement exercise groups in things like mail, which obviously is our key industry, and print together, there's probably a 60 or 70% saving on what was already saved from the fleet device by putting the right software at the front end to start with. So I think going forward, looking in, so I look at the private sector, by grouping different categories together, we'll probably do separate exercises by looking at the latest software technology that's available. Will give you a bigger win across government.
Okay. Eddie, do you want to listen?
Two phrases I wanted to put together, smart procurement, and I think it goes with, as Ken said at the start of the day, culture change. The issue with smart procurement is the public sector has to become more willing to look at innovation. It has to become more willing in that instance to then start working with SMEs, because the most innovative organisations in the marketplace are usually the SMEs. But I remember going back a long number of years. In fact, I'll tell you how far back it is, Simon. They weren't called MFDs then, they were still called photocopiers. And I remember, some of you will know the name Roy Lilly, that used to be in the health sector, and Roy still pops up on TV from time to time. Roy Lilly, 15, 16 years ago, came out at the time and said, I'm responsible for health procurement, I'm responsible for buying equipment for hospitals. I don't want to buy bloody photocopiers, I don't want to buy printers. I want a company that will charge me per copy and take responsibility for all that. I don't want to have to worry about putting donor cartridges in or anything else. If it's not working, they're losing money. If it's working, they're getting paid, and I don't have to bother about it. And that's the type of culture change that we need. It's people start to think off the wall in relation to a lot of things in procurement. It's what can we put in place that's totally different, will deliver what we need at the end of the day. Yeah, you're probably going to pay 4 and 5 times what you'd have paid copy cost, but it still might work out cheaper than managing the copiers. It's things like that that people have to start thinking, but that does come from culture change, that comes from understanding, and that you have to give innovation a chance and look at what innovation can bring, and it's taking that risk. And I think that's the big issue, is getting the public sector, particularly in the current economic climate, to start taking risks. It's a very difficult thing.
I guess that's the irony, isn't it? Now is the time we most need innovation and risk, and yet now's the time when people are probably least disposed to taking a risk. So how do you break out of that cycle?